Good evening, everyone. Before we dive into these stories, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. The more you engage, the more of these truly chilling tales will find their way into your feed. Now, let's step into the darkness together. When I was 14 years old, my family called a neighborhood just outside of Dayton, Ohio, home. It wasn't a bad place to grow up, not at all. It was just another one of those lines of middle-class houses that had sprung up back in the 70s. Maple trees provided shade for the sidewalks. Kids were always out throwing basketballs at those bent rims on their driveways. Everyone knew each other well enough to offer a wave, but not well enough to actually invite each other inside their homes. Our street would have cookouts in the summer, and in the spring, we'd all participate in block-wide garage sales. It felt safe, maybe even boring, to be honest. That's precisely why what I'm about to tell you stands out so vividly, like a splinter I just can't manage to dig out. Directly across the street from us lived Mr. Carver. I never knew his first name. Actually, I don't think anyone did. He was simply Carver. He was probably in his mid-50s, maybe. Tall, but he always slouched. His hair was always slicked back perfectly. His yard was always meticulously trimmed. He wasn't mean, exactly, but he definitely wasn't approachable. The most you could ever hope to get from him was a grunt of acknowledgement if you happened to wave. My mom used to say, "Some men are just private, honey. It doesn't necessarily make them bad people." And maybe she was right. But then there was the leash. Every single night, almost always right after dinner, when the sky would begin to turn that deep violet color and the streetlights would buzz to life, Mr. Carver would emerge from his house with a leash in his hand. It wasn't one of those rolled-up leashes tucked away like a forgotten habit. No, this was very deliberate. He held it tightly in his fist, looped tight, and walked it slowly down the block. The only problem was there was no dog. At first, I thought maybe he was just grieving. That's what my mom suggested when I finally mentioned it to her. "Some people just can't let go," she said as she set down her coffee. "Be kind. You never really know what they're going through." But it wasn't grief, not the way he was doing it. He wasn't reminiscing about anything. He was performing. He'd pause every few steps, tug at the leash as if he were correcting something, and then he'd look down, his lips moving like he was whispering commands. If you didn't know any better, you'd swear that there was a dog right there, trotting along beside him, completely invisible. And the more I watched him, the more I realized just how rehearsed it all looked, like he'd been doing this exact same thing every day for years. Same time, same route. He always ended up at the lamppost on the corner. He'd stand there for a full minute, the leash held taut, and then he'd nod, like he was finally satisfied, before turning around and heading back home. The first time I really noticed it, I was sitting on our porch enjoying a popsicle. He stopped at that lamppost, crouched down low, and started petting the empty air. Slow strokes, his head tilted, smiling faintly at absolutely nothing. Then, he tugged the leash once and stood up. My chest felt tight, like I'd accidentally walked in on something that I definitely shouldn't have. That night, I told my dad about it. He just laughed and said, "The guy's lonely. Cut him some slack." But I just couldn't because loneliness simply doesn't explain what I saw a week later. It was late August, incredibly humid and sticky, and I was out biking with my friend Lucas. We rounded the bend just in time to see Carver at the lamppost. Only this time, there was a shadow beside him. I swear on everything I love, I saw it. The distinct shape of a large animal, low to the ground, hunched over, just like a dog crouching, ready to lunge. It shimmered under the streetlight, like heat rising off the asphalt. There and then, not there. Carver reached down and scratched at the air right where its head should have been. I braked so hard that Lucas nearly plowed right into me. "What?" he snapped. I stammered something, but I just couldn't explain it right. He called me paranoid, and maybe I would have believed him, except for when I glanced back at Carver. He was staring directly at me, nodded. Not both of us, just me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I crept over to my window, being careful not to wake my parents. The street was completely empty. But on our porch, sitting right in the very center of the welcome mat, was a dog toy. One of those rubber bones, yellow and cracked, chewed up like it had been torn apart. I opened the front door to get rid of it, and I immediately froze. Around the middle of that bone was a piece of string tied in a tight knot, red string, the exact same faded red as Mr. Carver's leash. I dropped it and shut the door so fast that it rattled in its frame. The very next morning, my dad found it and threw it away. I tried to tell him about it, but he just shook his head. "Enough of this Carver nonsense. Don't start spreading rumors about the guy." But it wasn't nonsense because over the course of the next few weeks, I started noticing more and more things. Scratches in the dirt by the lamppost, deep grooves like something had dug in with claws, an oily, wet smell that lingered whenever Carver walked by, like damp fur that had been left out in the sun for too long. And sometimes, if I really strained my ears, I swore I could hear panting, low, heavy panting, like a dog sitting right outside my window. One night, I woke up to a noise so strange that it still makes me sick just thinking about it. A click, a metallic snap, over and over again. I knew that sound. It was the clasp of a leash being toyed with, flicked open and shut. I crept over to the window. My breath fogged up the glass as I pulled back the curtain just an inch, and my blood completely froze. Mr. Carver was standing at the end of our driveway. His face was tilted up at my window. The leash was in his hand, pulled tight like something was straining at the end of it. His lips moved, whispering rapidly, and then his free hand reached out, stroking the air at his side. But the grass was bending, flattening in long, heavy prints, like something massive was pacing just inches from him. I swear I even heard it growl, deep, wrong. And then Carver's head snapped right toward me. I ducked down so fast that I cracked my shoulder on the wall. My pulse was hammering in my throat. I didn't look again until I was absolutely sure that he was gone. When I woke up the next morning, I thought maybe I had just dreamed it all. But then I saw the marks on the siding beneath my window. 4 deep gouges dragged downward, wood splintered like it had been raked by claws. That was the night that I finally stopped telling myself that Mr. Carver was just lonely. The claw marks under my window stayed there for weeks. My dad said they were probably just from a raccoon or maybe some kid messing around. But I knew better than that. Raccoons don't leave scratches that are nearly half an inch deep, and no kid on our street carried claws that long. Every time I looked at them, my stomach would flip. I tried ignoring Carver, but ignoring him didn't make him go away. He still walked every night with that leash. Sometimes I'd peek out just for a second and see the way his arm jerked forward, like whatever he had was trying to drag him down the block. He'd scold it in a sharp whisper and then laugh quietly to himself, like he actually enjoyed fighting with it. The more I avoided him, the bolder he seemed to get. One Saturday morning, I found muddy paw prints all over our driveway. They didn't match any dog that I had ever seen before. Too long, too splayed, almost like fingers. They led from the street all the way to our porch, circled twice, and then stopped right at the front door. My mom scrubbed them away, muttering something about neighborhood kids. But when I asked her which kid's shoes looked like paws, she snapped at me to quit it. That night, I was lying awake when I heard it again. The breathing, low, heavy, wet, right outside my window. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it was just the wind. Then came the click of the leash clasp, opening and shutting, opening and shutting. My chest locked up. I couldn't move. When I finally dared to peek, there was a nose print on the glass. Huge, way too high for any dog. I scrambled backward across my bed, my heart hammering in my chest. But when I blinked again, it was gone. I told Lucas everything. He laughed at first, but when he saw just how pale I was, he got really quiet. Then he said the worst possible thing. We should follow him. I wanted to say no. Every single bone in my body wanted to say no. But if I didn't get any answers, I was sure I was going to lose my mind. So the next night, we left our bikes a block over and trailed Carver on foot. He took his usual route, but instead of turning back at the lamppost, he kept walking, past the cul-de-sac, past the very last row of houses, and into the woods. The leash was pulled tight the whole time. We crept along behind him, staying low. That's when I heard it for the very first time. An actual sound, not just breathing, growling. A low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the dirt under my shoes. Lucas grabbed my arm. His lips moved. What is that? We followed Carver into a clearing where the moonlight cut through the trees. He stood in the center, the leash straining forward so hard that his arm shook. "Sit," he commanded sharply. The growl stopped instantly. He crouched, stroking the air again, and the leaves on the ground moved. They crunched down, flattening under some kind of invisible weight. The branches trembled, like something huge had brushed right against them. Lucas backed up and snapped a twig under his foot. The sound cracked like a gunshot. Carver's head whipped around, his eyes glinting in the moonlight. He didn't look startled at all. He looked satisfied. "Come out," he said. His voice was completely calm, like a teacher calling on a student. "It's rude to spy." I wanted to run, but Lucas froze. Carver tugged the leash once, sharp, and the ground between us rippled, like paws digging in. Sprinting forward, we bolted, branches clawing at my face as we tore through the woods. Behind us, I heard claws raking dirt, snapping sticks, the crash of something barreling after us. Lucas screamed. We burst out of the trees and didn't stop until we were on our bikes, pedaling so hard that my thighs burned. I didn't look back until we were blocks away, and there he was, Carver, standing under the lamppost again, just standing there, the leash dangling loose, smiling faintly. After that, I just didn't sleep. Nights were the absolute worst. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the siding, I thought it was him. One night, I woke up to the sound of nails tapping against my window. Slow, deliberate, tap, tap, tap. I lay there frozen until it finally stopped. The next morning, there were scratches etched into the glass. My parents thought that I was cracking under the stress. My mom said, "If you don't stop with this Carver business, we're going to send you to stay with your aunt." I tried to explain it all, but she just shut me down. Nobody believed me until the night Carver crossed the street. It was close to midnight. I couldn't sleep, so I was sitting at my desk pretending to do homework. That's when I saw the movement. Carver stepped off his porch, leash in hand, and walked straight toward our house. My stomach dropped. I ducked under the window and crawled to the living room. Through the curtains, I saw him standing at our front door. The leash was pulled so tight that it looked like it was about to snap. His other hand reached out and stroked the air, slow and deliberate. Then came a sound that I will never, ever forget. Something panting, not from him, from the other side of the door, deep, guttural, hungry. And then the doorknob turned. I screamed for my dad. By the time he rushed out, the porch was completely empty. No carver, no leash, nothing, but the knob bore fresh scratches, metal torn and twisted like it had been clawed. 2 weeks later, my dad got a job transfer. We moved halfway across the state. My parents called it good timing. I called it escape. On moving day, as we pulled away, I looked back one last time. Carver was standing at the lamppost, holding the leash taut. His eyes followed our car until we turned the corner. Just before I lost sight of him completely, he lifted his free hand like he was waving goodbye. I haven't seen him since, but sometimes late at night, when the neighborhood is quiet and the house is still, I hear it again. That metallic click of a leash clasp snapping open and shut, and underneath it, the slow, heavy breathing of something waiting outside. The first time I noticed it, I thought I was dreaming. It was 3:00 in the morning when a sharp square of white light spilled across my ceiling. At first, I just assumed that my dad had left our porch light on, but when I pulled back my blinds, I quickly realized that it wasn't our house. It was the Prestons' garage next door. The Prestons weren't exactly friends of ours. Mr. Preston mostly kept to himself, tinkering with his tools, and Mrs. Preston would smile politely if you waved, but that was really about it. They were the kind of neighbors that you could live next to for years without ever even knowing their first names. That night, though, Mr. Preston wasn't tinkering with anything. He wasn't even moving. He stood right in the middle of his spotless garage, barefoot, wearing a plain white t-shirt and pajama pants, his hands hanging loosely at his sides. He was just staring at the far wall, perfectly still, like a statue. I watched him for a long time, waiting for some kind of movement, pacing, scratching, anything. But he didn't twitch, not even once. At exactly 3:18, the light clicked off, and the garage disappeared into darkness again. The next morning, when I mentioned it over breakfast, my mom just brushed me off. Maybe he couldn't sleep, she said, but something about the way he stood there, empty-eyed, just felt wrong. I told myself not to think about it anymore, until it happened again the next night, and the next, always at exactly 3:00 a.m., like clockwork. By the 5th night, I set my alarm. When it finally went off, the light was already on. Mr. Preston was standing in the exact same position, but this time his head tilted back slowly, almost mechanically, until he was staring directly at the ceiling. His lips then began to move, but I couldn't hear anything through the glass. I leaned in so close that my breath fogged up the window. That's when I realized that it wasn't words that he was speaking at all. His mouth moved way too fast, his jaw jerking like it was completely out of rhythm with any kind of normal speech. I dropped down from the window and pressed my back against the wall, my pulse racing. When I finally dared to look again, the garage was dark. For a while, I just kept it to myself. But once you've noticed something like that, you simply can't unnotice it. I started waiting every night. I kept notebooks on my desk, scribbling down times and notes, like I was documenting some kind of scientific experiment. September 12th, 3 a.m. sharp, light on, standing. September 13th, same time, hands shaking slightly. September 14th, light on. Mrs. Preston in garage, sitting in chair, unmoving. That night was the very first time I saw her there. She was sitting perfectly still in a dining chair that had been placed dead center on the polished garage floor. Mr. Preston circled her slowly, whispering words that I couldn't hear. Her head lolled to one side. Every so often, he'd stop and touch her hair, combing it back with his fingers. I couldn't look away. Something in my brain screamed at me to move, to call someone, but I was completely frozen. At 3:24, he stopped, bent close to her ear, and whispered something long. Her hand twitched once. Then the light went off. The next morning, she was out in her yard watering flowers, like absolutely nothing had happened. She even smiled at me when I took out the trash. That smile turned my stomach. I finally decided to tell my friend Nate about it. We were sitting in his car after school, and when I explained everything, he just laughed. "Dude, you seriously need to get some sleep. Nobody stands in their garage for fun." "Then come and see it," I said. He rolled his eyes but agreed. So the following Friday, Nate slept over. We both set our alarms for 2:55. When the light clicked on at 3 hours sharp, I motioned for him to come over to the window. He peered through the blinds, and his grin completely vanished. "Holy crap," he whispered. "Mr. Preston was there again. Same position, same slack arms." But this time, the garage door wasn't closed all the way. It hung about a foot off the ground. Rainwater from an earlier storm had pooled at the edge, reflecting the light. And in that strip of space, Nate swore that he saw something move. "Look!" he hissed. But by the time I crouched down, whatever he saw was already gone. "Mr." Preston's head turned sharply, like he had actually heard us. Nate backed away from the window. The light went out instantly, even though it was only 3:06. We didn't sleep at all for the rest of the night. The following evening, Nate refused to even talk about it. He kept saying, "Forget it, man. Just forget it." But I just couldn't. The next week, I started noticing other things. The Preston's trash cans were always overflowing, even though nobody ever saw them take any bags out. Their flower beds, once so pristine, began to rot. And one afternoon, as I was walking home from school, I heard thumping coming from inside their garage, even though both of their cars were in the driveway. 3 heavy thumps, then silence. The most disturbing thing happened during the next storm. It was late September, thunder shaking the walls, rain pelting the windows. I jolted awake at 3:02 to the familiar glow. This time, the garage door was wide open, rain splashing inside. A blue tarp lay spread across the floor. Mr. Preston was crouched at one end, gripping the corner. Something bulky was underneath it, something that twitched. He dragged it further inside, water streaming across the concrete. Lightning flashed, and for just a fraction of a second, I saw pale fingers slip out from under the tarp before he yanked it back into place. I gasped, ducked down, and slammed my eyes shut. My whole body was shaking. I stayed curled up on the floor until morning. When I looked again, the garage door was closed, the driveway spotless, like it had never even happened. But Mrs. Preston was gone. 2 days passed with no sign of her, no flowers watered, no smiles from the yard, curtains drawn tight. I asked my mom if she'd seen her, and she frowned. Not lately. That night, I set my alarm again, even though every nerve in my body was screaming at me not to. At 300 a.m., the garage light blinked on, but it wasn't Mr. Preston standing in the center. It was her, Mrs. Preston. Her arms hung limp at her sides, her head tilted back way too far, her mouth slack. She didn't move. She just stood there under that buzzing fluorescent light, staring at the same blank wall that he always had. And behind her, half in shadow, Mr. Preston leaned against the workbench, watching. I didn't sleep after that. I lay there with my blanket pulled up to my chin, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sound of the light switching off, but it stayed on for hours. The glow burned through the blinds until dawn finally swallowed it. When I went outside later that morning, the garage door was shut, the driveway dry, like nothing had ever happened, except now there was a faint black stain trailing from the gutter down the side of their house, almost like water had run off dirty, even though it hadn't rained since that storm. For the next 2 days, I kept checking at night, and every time the pattern was exactly the same. 3 Hezers light on. Mrs. Preston standing in the middle of the garage while her husband leaned against the workbench, watching her like she was some kind of display. On the 3rd night, my curiosity curdled into recklessness. I wanted proof, so I grabbed my phone and crept out of my room. The air felt thick, my chest buzzing with every heartbeat. I slipped out onto our porch, crouched down low, and zoomed in on their garage through the slats of our railing. The light snapped on at exactly 3. Mrs. Preston shuffled forward this time, her movements jerky, stiff, like every step took a massive amount of effort. Mr. Preston trailed a few feet behind her, his eyes never leaving her. She stopped dead center on the concrete, her head lowering, her arms twitching at her sides. He whispered something to her. Then he lifted his chin slightly, as if commanding her to look at me. And she did. Her eyes snapped toward me, pupils huge and black, her face completely drained of expression. I dropped my phone so fast that it clattered against the wood. By the time I scrambled to pick it up, the garage was dark again. The next morning, I checked the video. Nothing. Just static. Like the camera had glitched the second the light turned on. After that, I didn't dare go outside again at night, but I still couldn't stop checking from my window. October bled in. The nights grew colder, the leaves clogging the storm drains. One morning, I woke up to the distinct smell of burning plastic. I ran to the window, but there was no fire. Just the Prestons' garage wide open. A thick gray haze drifted out. In the center stood Mrs. Preston again, but this time she was wearing a plastic rain poncho smeared with something dark. She didn't move as Mr. Preston pulled something heavy from the back of a pickup truck into the garage. A rolled carpet. The end of it sagged, and when it did, I saw strands of hair spill out before he kicked it back into place. My knees went weak. I stumbled backward, gripping my desk. I tried to tell my dad, "You have to call someone, police, anybody." But the more frantically I spoke, the angrier he seemed to get. "Enough," he snapped. "You've been obsessed with these people for weeks now. You're making things up." But I wasn't. 2 nights later, I woke up to the garage light as usual, but this time, the door wasn't shut. It was open all the way. And for the first time, I actually heard them. A steady rhythm. Thump, drag, thump, drag. Mr. Preston was walking in circles with something scraping against the concrete. He was humming under his breath, the same tuneless hum that I'd heard before. Mrs. Preston followed behind him, step for step, her arms stiff at her sides, and then she dropped to her knees all at once, like a puppet whose strings had suddenly been cut. He didn't rush to help her up. He didn't even blink. He just knelt beside her and began whispering furiously into her ear. I slammed the blind shut and curled up on the floor, shaking until my teeth hurt. The next day, my mom complained that our garage smelled like something rotting. She thought maybe a raccoon had died in the walls, but I knew exactly where the smell was coming from. That weekend, Nate came back over. I begged him to see it just one more time. He resisted at first, but eventually he caved. We set our alarms for 2:55. At 3 sharp, the glow came. We crept to my window together, and what we saw completely froze us solid. There were 3 people in the garage now. Mr. Preston, standing tall with his arms crossed. Mrs. Preston, limp and twitching on her knees. And another guy I didn't recognize, all gagged up and tied to a chair, his eyes bugging out with pure terror. The dude was thrashing like crazy, the chair legs scratching against the floor. Mr. Preston mumbled something under his breath, and Mrs. Preston kind of lunged forward, her head all jerky and her hands moving like they were made of wood. She grabbed the guy's face with both hands. He was screaming into that gag, all muffled and panicked. She pressed her forehead against his, shaking like a leaf. Then she let out this sound I'll never forget, a wet, guttural moan, and just collapsed sideways. The guy started thrashing even harder, tipping the chair over. Mr. Preston just sighed, walked over, and lifted the chair back up with one hand. Then he reached for something on the workbench. That's when Nate and I took off. We didn't stop running until we were in my basement, gasping for air. We didn't say a word for hours. By morning, Nate was swearing he hadn't seen anything but shadows, that maybe it was the storm messing with the lights. But his face told a different story. He never came back to my house after that. 3 weeks later, the Prestons' house went dark. No garage light, no cars in the driveway, no curtains moving. It looked like they'd just up and left overnight. For sale signs went up, and some young couple moved in by Christmas. I never saw the Prestons again. But here's the part that really messes with me. 2 months after they disappeared, my dad called me into our garage. "Take a look at this," he said. He was pointing at the corner near the floor drain. There were these thin black stains trailing across the concrete, winding their way toward the wall we shared with the Prestons, and you could just barely smell burnt plastic in the air. That night, I set my alarm again, just in case. At exactly 3:00 a.m., a light snapped on, not in the Prestons' house, but in our garage. And when I crept to the door, holding my breath, I swear I heard it. A low, steady humming. Music. When I was a kid, everyone on our street treated Mr. Whitaker like he was their grandpa. He was in his late 70s, skinny as a rail with white hair that never seemed to stay combed, and he wore the same pair of brown suspenders every single day. He lived alone after his wife passed away, but he always waved. He always had peppermints in his pocket for the kids and always offered to help push your trash can back up the driveway after the garbage truck came. To us, he was harmless, sweet, even. My mom used to bake him pies for the holidays. My dad helped shovel his walk in the winter. Nobody ever had a bad thing to say about him. He had this big old chest freezer in his garage, one of those heavy white ones with the thick lid. I remember seeing it once when I helped him carry groceries. It hummed really loud, louder than any freezer I'd ever heard, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Then he started offering meat. It was subtle at first. "I bought too much chicken," he'd say, handing my mom a plastic-wrapped package. Or, "I've got more ground beef than I'll ever eat. Would you like some?" My parents thanked him, thought he was just being generous. But he started offering it to everyone on the block, and people started joking about how he must have a Costco membership big enough to feed an army. One night, though, I was taking the trash out when I noticed something weird. The freezer lid was open, just a few inches, but enough to let out a little curl of frosty air into the warm night. Mr. Whitaker was inside the garage, fumbling with something on the shelf, his back to me. I saw packages stacked inside, meat wrapped in butcher paper. But there was something else, too. A small strip of fabric caught in the seal of the lid, dark red against the white. I stood there too long. He turned, saw me staring. His face didn't change, but he shuffled over quickly, pushing the lid down hard until it sealed with a thud. "Cold night for it, isn't it?" he said with that grandfatherly smile. Then he shut the garage door. I told myself it was nothing, but after that, I started watching him more closely. The meat he gave us always tasted a little off. My mom said it was freezer burn. My dad said they were just cheap cuts. But to me, it tasted metallic, heavy. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized no one had ever actually seen him buy this meat. Nobody saw him at the grocery store. He never carried shopping bags, never had boxes delivered. The freezer just always stayed full. A month later, our neighbor's dog went missing. Rusty, a golden retriever that used to bark at everything. His owners put up flyers, knocked on doors, searched the woods behind the neighborhood. Nothing. Days passed and everyone figured he'd gotten hit by a car or just ran off. But that same week, Mr. Whitaker started offering pork chops. I didn't eat them. By then, I was obsessed. I made excuses to hang around outside at night, watching his garage. Sometimes I'd hear the freezer lid slam shut around midnight, like he was rushing to hide something. Once I saw him drag a heavy black trash bag from his trunk, struggle to lift it, and dump it straight into the freezer before slamming the lid shut. The bag sagged oddly, like whatever was inside had limbs. I wanted to tell my parents, but how do you say that about the man who handed out candy to every kid at Halloween? They'd have locked me in my room. The night everything changed. I was walking home from a friend's house. It was late, around 11:30. I cut through our block, quiet, except for the buzz of a single streetlight. Mr. Whitaker's garage door was wide open. The freezer lid was propped up, and he wasn't around. I should have kept walking. Every part of me knew I should have, but I stepped closer, my sneakers crunching on the gravel. I told myself I just wanted to prove I was wrong, that it really was bulk meat from Costco. When I reached the freezer, the humming filled my ears. Frost clung to the edges. I gripped the lid and pulled it open further. The first thing I saw was meat wrapped in paper, stacked in neat bricks. But between them, something pale jutted out. Skin, not butcher paper. It was a hand. Small, feminine, frozen stiff. The nails were still painted with chipped pink nail polish. A silver ring clung to one finger. I stumbled back, my stomach churning. My elbow clipped the shelf, and a jar shattered on the floor. That's when I heard it. Footsteps shuffling behind me. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, Mr. Whitaker said softly. His voice wasn't kind this time. It was flat, cold. I turned. He was standing in the doorway, silhouetted by the porch light behind him, his suspenders loose on his shoulders. He didn't look like a harmless old man anymore. He looked like someone who had just caught me trespassing in a place I was never meant to see. And the worst part was, he wasn't surprised. He was smiling. I froze where I stood. The hum of the freezer filled the silence, louder than my heartbeat, louder than anything. Mr. Whitaker's shadow stretched long across the garage floor. He didn't move closer. Not at first. He just stood there, blocking the exit, smiling faintly, like this was the moment he'd been waiting for. "You shouldn't go poking around in an old man's business," he said finally, his voice steady, too calm. I tried to speak, but my throat was locked up. My eyes flicked to the freezer, back to that hand, stiff and pale, the ring catching the fluorescent light. I thought about making a run for it, but he shuffled one step closer, and I realized I wouldn't make it. Instead, I stammered something pathetic. I thought you left your door open," he chuckled, low and humorless. "Doors are always open if you're looking hard enough." The way he said it made my stomach churn, like he wanted me to look. He stepped closer, and the sour smell of freezer burn and something rotten followed him. "Do you know why I give out meat to everyone?" His eyes glittered as he asked. "Because it makes them trust me. Nobody questions kindness. They take and never once ask where it comes from." I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. Then he leaned close, his breath damp against my ear. "They'll never believe you. Nobody ever believes the kid." He shuffled past me to the freezer, lifted the lid wider, and pointed inside like he was showing me a prized collection. My legs trembled. There were packages, sure, but not all of them were meat. Some were bundled in blankets, hair frozen to the fabric, a child's shoe, a bracelet, and beneath them, the unmistakable curve of a human face, lips blue with ice. I gagged and stumbled backward. My foot hit the jar shards on the floor, and the crunch snapped me back to reality. I bolted for the door, shoving past him with all the force I had. He was slower than me, but his hand grazed my shoulder as I escaped into the night. I didn't stop running until I burst into my house, slamming the door, screaming for my parents. They didn't believe me. My dad stormed into the garage, grabbed my shoulders, and told me never to make up something so sick again. My mom cried, not because of what I'd said, but because she thought I was losing it. They didn't call the police. They didn't even confront him. And the next day, Mr. Whitaker was out mowing his lawn like nothing had happened. He even waved at my mom. I couldn't stand it. For days, I barely ate. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hand, the chipped pink nail polish, the silver ring. Then came the breaking point. 2 weeks later, posters went up at the grocery store. A girl from my school had gone missing. Alyssa Reynolds, 17, dark hair. A shy smile I remembered from the back of my English class. I stared at the flyer, my stomach churning because I knew that hand, that chipped pink polish. That was hers. I tried to tell people, but nobody listened. My dad threatened to take my phone if I brought it up again. My friends avoided me. Nate stopped coming over entirely, but I couldn't let it go. I started sneaking out, circling Whitaker's house, hoping to see something that would prove me right. Once I caught the garage light on at 2 a.m. through a crack in the door. I crept closer, heart in my throat. He was standing over the freezer, humming softly the way a parent hums to a baby. He wasn't moving packages this time. He was just stroking the lid. I backed away into the dark, my hands shaking so badly I thought I'd collapse. Then one night, the sound came. A single muffled bang from his garage, then another, and then faint but clear. A girl's voice screaming for help before it was choked off. That was the last straw. I called the police myself. I didn't care if my parents grounded me for life. I gave them everything. My name, my address, his address. I told them about the freezer, the packages, the missing girl. 2 squad cars showed up. I watched from my window as they knocked on his door. Mr. Whitaker greeted them with that same smile, waved them inside. They stayed about 15 minutes, then came back out laughing with him. One of them even clapped him on the shoulder. They left without even looking in the garage. The next morning, Mr. Whitaker strolled over to our porch. He placed a neatly wrapped package of steaks on the railing and looked right at me through the window. Then he winked. I couldn't breathe. A week later, Alyssa's case went cold. The posters faded in the rain. The neighborhood moved on, and Mr. Whitaker kept handing out meat, smiling, shuffling his trash cans back into place every Thursday morning. But here's the part I'll never forget. The night before we finally moved away, I couldn't resist one last look. I peeked through his garage window. The freezer lid was wide open, empty, and there on top, in plain view, was the silver ring with the chipped pink nail polish. Beside it was a brand new stack of butcher paper waiting to be filled. Music. The summer the Callahans moved in next door, My mom said our street finally felt alive again. For years, it had just been the same quiet families. People who waved when they got the mail and maybe borrowed a cup of sugar once in a while, but mostly kept to themselves. Then one Saturday morning, a moving truck backed up to the curb, and the Callahans arrived. Mr. Callahan was tall, square-jawed, with a voice that really carried when he greeted people. His wife, Marissa, was the kind who remembered names instantly and handed out fresh-baked cookies on day one. They had a daughter in middle school, a boy in high school, even a golden retriever that bounded across their lawn like a character in a movie. It was the kind of family people compared themselves to, always quietly wondering if their own lives measured up. My mom loved them instantly. She even leaned over to me as we carried a welcome basket and whispered, "They're the type who make neighborhoods better." At first, she was right. The Callahans hosted barbecues, lent out power tools, and brought in packages when you were out of town. I'd see Mr. Callahan jogging at sunrise and Marissa planting flowers in their yard. They seemed perfect, maybe a little too perfect. It wasn't until I got invited inside that I noticed the first crack in the facade. It was a Friday evening in late spring when Mr. Callahan stopped me outside and said, "Why don't you come by tomorrow night? We're having a little get-together. You should see the place." He smiled wide, teeth gleaming. I went. Their house was spotless. Wood floors were shining, walls were freshly painted, and family photos were arranged just right. Marissa served drinks and homemade bread. The kids were polite, almost too polite, like they'd rehearsed exactly when to laugh. But upstairs, at the end of the hallway, was a door that didn't fit in. It was painted the same white as the others, but it had 3 heavy padlocks running down the side. Not decorative locks, industrial ones, thick and bolted right into the frame. I slowed down when I passed it, something drawing me toward it. "Mr. Callahan's voice cut through the hallway. "Storage," he said casually, even though I hadn't asked. He was right behind me, his smile a little tighter now. "Every house has that one room. Right, ours just needs a little extra security." I nodded, feeling embarrassed, and hurried back to the living room. But the image of that door burned in my mind all night. The next week, I started noticing sounds. At first, I thought it was their dog. A low thump, sometimes a scraping, sometimes a muffled bump like furniture shifting. But when I asked Marissa about it one afternoon, she said the dog slept downstairs. Her eyes flicked toward the staircase when she said it, like she wanted to change the subject fast. Then came the night I couldn't ignore it. It was past midnight when I woke up to faint noises. Our houses were close enough that I could sometimes hear their plumbing, so at first I figured it was just pipes. But then I heard it again. Not pipes, not furniture. A voice, muffled, weak, but definitely a voice. I pressed my ear to the wall. It came in bursts, like someone was really straining. I couldn't make out any words, just the tone, desperate pleading. The next morning, I tried to tell my parents. My dad just laughed. "Walls are thin, probably just their TV." My mom agreed. "Don't let your imagination run away with you." But I knew the difference between a TV and a person. I started timing it. The noises came at night, always after midnight, sometimes lasting 10 minutes, sometimes an hour, thumping, dragging, and faint cries that faded into silence. One night, I sat at my desk with my window cracked open, listening. Around 1 a.m., I heard it as clear as day. A voice whispering, hoarse and broken. I leaned forward, straining to catch it. "Help!" Just one word, but it was enough to turn my blood cold. The next morning, I ran into their son while I was taking out the trash. I asked him casually, "So, what's upstairs in your house? What's in the locked room?" He froze. His eyes darted to mine for half a second, then looked away. "Nothing," he muttered before walking off fast. His trash bag tore a little as he dragged it, and something clattered out. A bracelet, old, rusted, with beads spelling out a name I didn't recognize. He didn't notice it fall. I picked it up. The clasp was broken, like it had been yanked off. That night, the noises were worse. The muffled cries were sharper, louder. I swear I could hear fists pounding on the wall. I sat frozen in my chair, staring at that side of the house, unable to move. At 2:00 a.m., the pounding stopped. And then, clear as a bell through the wall, "Is someone there?" I clapped my hand over my mouth. I didn't answer, but every instinct in me screamed that whoever was behind that door knew I was listening. The next day, I told myself I'd never bring it up again, that I'd let it go, that I'd mind my own business. But late that evening, Marissa knocked on our door. She smiled politely, holding a plate of cookies. Her hands were shaking slightly, just enough for me to notice. When she handed me the plate, I saw her wrist, bruised yellow and purple under her sleeve, and when our eyes met, hers were wet. Just for a second, she looked at me like she wanted to say something, like she wanted me to know. Then she smiled again, bright and practiced. "Enjoy." I closed the door, the plate trembling in my hands, and realized I couldn't pretend anymore. There was something in that locked room, and it was alive. After that night, with Marissa's bruised wrist and her trembling smile, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was somehow responsible. Every time I heard the noises, I told myself to stay out of it. Every time I passed their house, I reminded myself it wasn't my problem. But that look she gave me, the one that silently begged for help, made it impossible. I started walking past their house more often, slowing down just enough to listen. In daylight, it seemed normal. Kids' bikes in the driveway, the dog barking at squirrels, Marissa tending to her flowers. But at night, the facade cracked, and the locked room noises were louder now. The muffled cries sometimes formed words. "Please don't help me." One night, I grabbed my phone and pressed it against the wall, recording. The pounding came through clearly, followed by a voice rasping, "He won't let me out." I replayed it a dozen times, my skin crawling. It was no hallucination. The next day, I showed it to my best friend, Nate. He shook his head. "Could be anything. TV, old pipes." "Old pipes don't say help me," I snapped. He stared at me for a long time, then said, "If you're right, you need proof, something nobody can explain away." That night, I got my proof. It was raining hard, the kind of storm that drowns out everything. But even over the thunder, I heard it, screaming, not muffled this time. Raw, terrified. It vibrated through the walls like it was right in my room. I ran to the window. Their upstairs light flickered, and then, just for a second, the curtain lifted, showing a pale hand clawing at the glass before being yanked back into the dark. I stumbled away from the window, gasping. I wanted to call the police right then, but I knew what they'd say. Without solid evidence, they'd laugh me off just like my parents had. So, I did something reckless. The next afternoon, while the Callahans were hosting another cheerful cookout, I slipped inside. Their back door was propped open for guests, and nobody noticed me climbing the stairs. The hallway smelled faintly of bleach. I stopped at the locked door, my heart slamming in my chest. The padlocks gleamed in the dim light, scratched and worn from years of use. I pressed my ear against the wood. Silence, then a breath. shaky and close. "Who's there?" a whisper rasped from inside. I jerked back, my pulse racing. I live next door," I whispered. "Who are you?" There was a pause. Then, "My name is Emily." Her voice cracked on the syllables, raw from screaming. "Please don't let them leave me here." I fumbled at the padlocks, desperate, but they were solid. My hand shook as I tried each one, useless without a key. Footsteps creaked downstairs. Laughter floated up from the party. I had to get out of there. I whispered through the door, "I'll come back. I promise." I slipped out before anyone saw me, but the sound of her voice haunted me all night. The next few days, I could barely function. I skipped meals, stared at my walls, and listened for her voice. Every night, I heard it, softer now, weaker. "Please." Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I told my parents everything. My dad slammed his fist on the table. "Enough! You're obsessed. You're making up stories." I begged them to listen, to at least check the door. My mom cried. My dad threatened to ground me if I brought it up again. I realized then that if I didn't do something myself, Emily was going to die in that room. The next stormy night, I grabbed a crowbar from our shed and crept into their yard. The garage door was cracked open. No cars inside. I slipped through, my shoes squeaking on the wet floor. The house was too quiet, too perfect. I made it upstairs, my hands slick on the crowbar. I jammed it under the bottom lock and pried hard. Metal screeched, and the lock popped free. I yanked at the second, my heart pounding. That's when a voice behind me said, "I knew you'd come back." I froze. Mr. Callahan stood at the end of the hall, shadows swallowing his face. Marissa was beside him, holding the dog's collar tight. The kid stood further back, silent, watching me with blank eyes. He stepped closer, slow and deliberate. "Curiosity," he said softly, "is what gets people hurt." The crowbar slipped from my hand. My chest tightened. I bolted, shoving past him, sprinting down the stairs, out the back door, and into the storm. I didn't stop until I collapsed in my own yard, drenched and shaking. The next morning, the locks were gone. The door upstairs was just another white door now, unmarked, perfectly normal. When I told Nate, he didn't believe me. When I begged my parents to look, they found nothing. No padlocks, no scratches, no sign of anyone ever being there. The Callahans smiled at me from across their yard that afternoon, waving like always. Marissa's wrist was hidden beneath her sleeve. Mr. Callahan mowed his lawn. The kids rode their bikes. Perfect, untouchable. But that night, I woke up to a sound that curdled my blood. It was a knock on my bedroom wall. 3 sharp knocks and then a whisper, faint but clear, seeping through the plaster. "Please don't let them take me away again." Music. The summer the Rileys moved in next door, my mom said our street finally felt like it was alive again. For years, it had just been the same quiet families, people who waved when they got the mail and maybe borrowed a cup of sugar once in a while, but mostly kept to themselves. Then, one Saturday morning, a moving truck backed up, pulled into the driveway of the empty house next to ours, and just like that, they were there, the quintessential American family. Mr. Riley was tall and broad-shouldered, the kind of guy who could carry 3 boxes at once without even breaking a sweat. His wife, Claire, always had a polite smile for everyone and wore floral dresses, no matter how hot it was. And then there was their son, Evan. He looked about my age, maybe 13 or 14. He was skinny, pale, with a mess of brown hair that always seemed to be falling into his eyes. While his parents were busy chatting with the neighbors, Evan just stood there, clutching his backpack like he didn't quite fit into the scene. I tried to be friendly at first. I waved whenever I walked by. Sometimes he'd wave back, but never with a smile. It was like he was just following orders. That week, my mom baked them a pie, and when we brought it over, Claire thanked us profusely, all smiles and sweet words. Mr. Riley shook my dad's hand like he was closing a business deal, but Evan just stayed half hidden behind his mom, his eyes darting around like he was expecting something to happen. I tried to convince myself that he was just shy. The first time I realized something was wrong was at school. Evan ended up in a couple of my classes. He didn't talk, didn't joke, and didn't even eat lunch with anyone. He'd sit at the far corner of the cafeteria, staring at his tray, but barely touching his food. When a teacher called on him, he'd freeze like a deer caught in headlights, his answers short and nervous. One afternoon, while we were packing up, I noticed his hoodie sleeve slip down. There was a mark on his wrist, dark and ugly, like a bruise. He yanked the sleeve back down so fast it was like he thought showing it was a crime. That night, I heard it for the first time. It was late, maybe 1 a.m. I was reading in bed when I heard something faint through the wall. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then it came again. A soft, muffled sob. I slipped out of bed and pressed my ear against the wall that faced the Rileys' house. The sound became clearer crying. A boy's voice and then another sound, harsh and sharp. A man's voice, low but furious. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. The tone said enough. There was a crash, then silence. I sat frozen, every hair on my body standing on end. I wanted to believe it was just the TV, but deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I told my parents about it over breakfast. My mom frowned, but shook her head. "It's not our place to judge," she said. "Every family has arguments." My dad just muttered, "Keep your nose out of it. You don't want to start trouble." But once you've heard something like that, you can't just pretend you didn't. The sounds didn't stop. Every few nights, sometimes twice a week, I'd wake up to muffled voices. Sometimes it was crying, sometimes begging. I heard words like, "Please, no, stop." Other times, it was just broken sobs, followed by silence so heavy it made my stomach churn. I started watching Evan more closely at school. The bruises moved around, from his wrist to his forearm, once across his jaw where he tried to hide it with his sleeve. When I asked him if he was okay, he barely whispered, "Don't." And then he walked away. The guilt was eating me up inside. One Saturday, my parents dragged me to the Rileys' barbecue. Their backyard was immaculate. The grill was smoking, and the table was piled high with food. Neighbors were laughing and chatting, and Claire was moving gracefully between them, smiling like a hostess from a magazine. But Evan wasn't with the other kids. He was sitting alone on the porch steps, staring at the grass. When I sat down next to him and offered him a soda, he flinched like I'd raised my hand to hit him. "You don't have to," he muttered, his eyes fixed on the ground. "Don't have to what?" I asked. He shook his head, whispering so softly I almost didn't hear him. "Pretend." Before I could respond, Mr. Riley's voice boomed across the yard. "Evan!" He snapped his fingers like he was calling a dog. Evan jumped up, nearly spilling his soda, and hurried inside without a word. The neighbors kept chatting like nothing had happened, but I couldn't shake the pit in my stomach. That night, the sounds were louder than ever, thumping, crying. A scream muffled so fast it barely escaped the walls. I pressed my pillow over my ears, but I could still hear it. Hear him. Days passed, and Evan looked worse. His eyes were bloodshot. His clothes hung looser, like he hadn't eaten properly in weeks. He stopped looking at anyone, even the teachers. Then came the storm. It was after midnight. Rain was hammering against the windows. I was drifting in and out of sleep when I heard something new, a rattling sound close by. Our garage door. I sat up, my heart pounding. The noise came again, a faint scrape, then a soft knock. I grabbed a flashlight and crept downstairs. The house was silent except for the rain. My hand shook as I unlocked the garage door and pushed it open. And that's when I saw him. Evan. He was crouched in the corner of our garage, soaked to the skin, shivering violently. His eyes were wide, his lips trembling. When the light hit him, he flinched so hard he nearly toppled over. "Please," he whispered, his voice raw and broken. "Don't let them take me back." For a moment, neither of us moved. The rain drummed on the roof, and my flashlight beam trembled across Evan's face. His eyes darted to the door behind me, terrified, like he expected them to burst in at any second. I crouched down. "You're safe," I whispered. "You're safe here." But he didn't believe me. He shook his head violently, curls of wet hair flinging water everywhere. "They'll come. They always come." I tried to ask what he meant, but before he could answer, there was a sound that froze my blood, a sharp knock at our front door. 3 raps, heavy, deliberate. Evan whimpered and backed deeper into the shadows of the garage. "Don't let them. Please." My chest locked up. Whoever it was, they knew he was here. I killed the flashlight and crouched low, listening. My dad's voice came from upstairs, groggy. "Who the hell is knocking at this hour?" His footsteps started toward the front door. I sprinted from the garage, intercepting him in the hallway. "Dad, don't." But it was too late. The doorbell rang, long and insistent. When my dad cracked the door open, Mr. Riley was standing on the porch, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. His smile was tight, forced. "Evening," he said calmly, though his eyes glittered with something hard. "Sorry to bother you. Evan seems to have wandered off." "You wouldn't have seen him, would you?" Behind him. Claire was clutching an umbrella, her knuckles white on the handle. She didn't look at my dad. She looked past him, into the house, searching. My dad started to answer, but I grabbed his arm hard enough to make him flinch. "No," I blurted out. "Haven't seen him." There was a pause. "Mister." Riley's smile never wavered. Rainwater dripped off his chin. Then he nodded. "Well, if you do, you'll let us know, won't you?" His tone wasn't a question. It was a warning. They left slowly, their silhouettes vanishing into the storm. My dad turned to me, confused. "What was that about?" I couldn't hold it in anymore. The words just tumbled out in a rush. "He's here, in the garage. Dad, they're hurting him." At first, I thought he'd explode, but when he saw my face, when he saw how badly I was shaking, something shifted in him. He followed me silently to the garage. The moment Evan came into the light, my dad's face drained of color. Evan's shirt was clinging to him, torn at the collar, and bruises patterned his arms where the sleeves had ridden up. His lips moved soundlessly, but no words came out. My dad didn't hesitate. He threw a blanket around Evan's shoulders and said, "Go wake your mother now." We huddled in the kitchen, the rain rattling the windows. My mom wrapped her arms around Evan, whispering, "You're safe, sweetheart. You're safe now." For the first time, he broke down, sobbing and clutching her like she was a lifeline. My dad picked up the phone and dialed 911. It felt like forever before the flashing lights cut through the storm. Officers crowded our porch, their radios crackling. My dad spoke fast and firmly, showing them the state Evan was in. They didn't waste any time. Within minutes, They were pounding on the Riley's door. From our window, I saw Mr. Riley try to smile his way through it, but the mask cracked when they pushed past him. Claire followed, her umbrella still in her hand, her eyes darting wildly. Then the shouting started, the kind you can't mistake for anything else. By dawn, the street was swarming with police cruisers. The Rileys were led out in handcuffs, their perfect family image shattered. Neighbors stood on their porches, mouths agape, clutching their robes. Nobody had suspected a thing. Nobody except me. CPS workers arrived, their voices gentle as they spoke to Evan. He wouldn't let go of my mom's hand, his eyes darting nervously at every sound. When they finally coaxed him toward the car, he looked at me. For the first time since he'd moved in, he actually smiled. It was small and fragile, but it was real. That was the last time I saw him. They said he was placed with relatives in another state, somewhere safe, somewhere far away. The house next door sat empty for months. The perfect lawn grew patchy, and the windows gathered dust. But every time I walked past, I felt the weight lift a little more. When Marcus moved into the duplex next door, everyone hailed him as the perfect tenant. He showed up with a moving van on a Wednesday afternoon, unloaded his boxes in neat stacks, and introduced himself to everyone he passed. He wasn't loud or overbearing, just present, always with that wide smile, the kind that put people at ease. My parents liked him immediately. Finally, a decent neighbor, my dad said, shaking his hand across the driveway. Someone who actually says hello. I wanted to like him, too. He looked normal enough, early 30s, short brown hair, crisp button-up shirts, even on weekends. He reminded me of the kind of guy who'd sell you insurance, the sort of person you forget the second you look away. But that was the problem. He seemed too normal, too polished. The first time he unnerved me was when I was taking out the trash. He was dragging his own bin down the driveway and smiled when he saw me. "Late night ramen again," he said. I stopped dead in my tracks. I hadn't told him what I'd eaten. I hadn't even taken the container outside yet. I forced a laugh. "Yeah, guess my house smells like noodles." "Guess so," he said, still smiling, before wheeling his bin away. I told myself he was just making a lucky guess, but the coincidences kept piling up. A week later, I was on the phone in my room, venting to my best friend about how stressed I was about an upcoming exam. No one else in my family knew about it. I hadn't even mentioned it at dinner. The next morning, Marcus passed me in the driveway. "Don't worry about that test," he said casually, like it was small talk. "You'll do great." I froze. He winked and walked on. That was when I realized the walls in the duplex were thinner than I thought. But this wasn't just muffled voices through drywall. He repeated my words back, exactly tone and all. He wasn't just overhearing, he was actively listening. After that, I started noticing noises at night. Little things. A faint shuffle, a soft thud. The kind of sound you'd ignore if you weren't already paranoid. But I was. One night, lying in bed, I decided to test him. I spoke out loud softly, pretending to be on the phone. "I think I'm gonna cut my hair short," I said into the darkness. The next morning, Marcus caught me as I left for school. "You'd look great with shorter hair," he said. My stomach flipped. I started closing my blinds, keeping my voice down, double-checking the locks before bed, but it didn't help. He still found ways to slip things into conversation, what music I listened to, what shows I streamed late at night. Once, he even said, "Those blue pajamas suit you." I hadn't worn them outside my room. That was the night I stopped sleeping with the lights off. Weeks passed, and the tension grew unbearable. I barely ate. I stopped inviting friends over. My parents thought I was just being antisocial, but I couldn't explain it to them without sounding insane. "He's listening through the walls" isn't something you can say without people laughing. Then came the night I found the vent. It was past 2 in the morning. I'd fallen asleep at my desk with my lamp still on. A hollow tap woke me up, sharp and metallic, like a coin hitting steel. I sat up, my heart racing, straining to hear. Then came another sound, a crack, faint but deliberate. It was coming from my closet. I grabbed my phone, switched on the flashlight, and slid the closet door open. The smell hit me first, metallic, dusty, like old copper wires. At the back wall, one of the vents looked wrong. The screws were loose, and the grate was bent outward just slightly, like someone had pried it open and then put it back again. My pulse thundered in my ears. I crouched down, shining the light through the slats. On the other side wasn't just a vent shaft, it was a hollow space. The drywall had been cut away, widened enough for a person to crawl through, and inside were things that didn't belong: crumpled candy wrappers, tissues, and a spiral notebook with a frayed cover. My stomach twisted as I reached through the gap and pulled it out. The first page stopped my breath cold. Day 1, she leaves her window open when she sleeps. Day 2, she bites her nails when she's nervous. Day 3, she hums songs when she brushes her teeth. Page after page of it. Logs of my life. What time I came home. What I ate. What I wore. Little sketches in the margins, my backpack. My sneakers. The lamp on my desk, and worse, word-for-word transcripts of things I'd said in private late at night when I thought I was alone. My vision blurred. I dropped the notebook like it was burning my skin. And that's when I heard a sound inside the vent. Not pipes, not the house settling. A soft, deliberate shift. I raised the light. The beam flickered across the slats. And in that split second, something moved, a shadow pulling back into the hollow. The smell of aftershave drifted out. His aftershaves, and then, close against the metal, a whisper so soft I barely caught it. "You weren't supposed to find that." I stumbled back from the closet, the whisper echoing in my ears. My phone nearly slipped from my hand, the light bouncing across the walls as I backed into my desk. My mouth went dry. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The vent stayed still, silent. I slammed the closet door shut and pressed my back against it, my chest heaving. My brain screamed at me to tell someone, anyone. But when I pictured my parents' faces, I saw the disbelief already forming. "It's just a vent. You imagined it." That's what they'd say. I slept with the lights on that night. I didn't really sleep at all. By morning, I had convinced myself to be brave. I'd show my parents the notebook. I'd shove it in their hands and make them see. But when I opened the closet again, it was gone. The grate was back in place, screwed in tight, with no gap in the drywall. The wrappers were gone. The notebook was gone, like it had never existed. My knees buckled. I searched every inch of the closet, every shelf, under my bed, even the laundry hamper. Nothing. When I tried to explain it to my mom, she gave me the look I dreaded, half concerned, half annoyed. "You've been stressed. You probably dreamed it. Please don't work yourself up. Dreams don't leave candy wrappers. Dreams don't whisper back." That night, I locked my door. Still, the noises came, scrapes in the walls, a faint creak like someone shifting their weight in a cramped space. Sometimes I swore I could hear breathing so close it made my skin crawl. Marcus still smiled at me in the driveway like nothing was wrong, like we shared a secret. Once, he even said, "Sleep well," and my stomach flipped. I started staying out later, lingering at friends' houses, riding the bus around just to avoid going home. But I couldn't avoid it forever. Every night ended in the same place: my room, my closet, that vent. And then came the night I saw him. It was past midnight. My lamp was off, but I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling. The silence pressed down heavy, broken only by the faint tick of my clock. Then the closet door creaked. I froze. I hadn't opened it. I hadn't heard anyone come in. My hand fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking. I raised the screen just enough to cast a glow across the room. The closet door stood open a few inches. The vent grate hung loose, and in the gap, just barely visible, an eye stared back at me. I dropped the phone, my heart slamming against my ribs. When I grabbed it again, the vent was closed, silent. The next morning, I told myself I'd had enough. I marched straight to the landlord and demanded he check the walls. He looked confused but humored me, even came inside with a screwdriver. He unscrewed the vent and shined a flashlight inside. "Empty," he said, shrugging. "No crawl space, just insulation." But I saw the way he frowned, like something didn't add up. Still, nothing was there. No wrappers, no notebook, no gap. I wanted to scream. The landlord left, muttering that maybe I should get some rest. That night, I pushed my dresser in front of the closet. It made the room cramped, but at least I could breathe without staring at that vent. 2 nights later, I woke up to a sound that made my blood run cold, the scrape of wood against wood. I sat up, holding my breath. The dresser was shifting, inch by inch, scraping across the floor. I lunged, bracing my weight against it. My whole body shook as I held it in place. Something pressed from the other side, steady and deliberate, not frantic, patient. Then, just as suddenly, the pressure stopped. Silence. I stayed awake until dawn, sitting on the dresser with every light on. By then, I knew there was no keeping him out. I tried going to the police. I told them everything from the notebook to the vent to the eye staring through. They took notes, nodded politely, and told me that without evidence, there wasn't much they could do. "Thin walls," the officer said. "Are you sure you're not just hearing your neighbor move around at night?" I walked out of the station, shaking and humiliated. That night, Marcus knocked on my door. He never had before. I stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the knob as his knuckles rapped 3 times. "Everything okay in there?" he called, his voice calm and pleasant. "Heard you've been having trouble sleeping." My throat closed up. I didn't answer. After a long pause, he said softly, "You don't need to be afraid of me." Then he laughed, low and quiet, and walked away. I shoved a chair under the doorknob and sat clutching a kitchen knife until the sun came up. Days blurred. I barely ate, barely slept. Every sound made me jump. My grades slipped. My parents begged me to talk to someone. But what could I say that the man next door was crawling through my walls at night, writing down the way I chewed my food? Then came the ending I'd been dreading. It was a Sunday night, late. I was exhausted, half dreaming, when I felt a shift in the air, the faintest pressure on the mattress. I opened my eyes. Marcus was standing at the foot of my bed, not smiling this time, just watching. His hands hung loose at his sides. His chest rose and fell, calm, like he belonged there. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The dresser was still braced against the closet. The door was still locked. And yet, he was here. He tilted his head, studying me in the dark. Then he whispered the same words I'd read on the first page of his notebook. "She leaves her window open when she sleeps." Music. When Mr. Daniels moved into our neighborhood, every parent breathed a sigh of relief. He was the kind of dad people wished every street had. The one who fixed broken bikes, grilled burgers at block parties, and volunteered to coach Little League even when he didn't have the time. Most importantly, he offered rides. Our town didn't have the best bus routes, and parents were always juggling work schedules. So, when Mr. Daniels cheerfully said, "I can swing by and grab the kids on my way to school," no problem at all. People practically thanked him like he was doing charity. By the second week, it became routine. Every morning, his big black SUV would roll down the street, kids piling in with backpacks slung half asleep and clutching juice boxes. My parents thought it was great. "Reliable, safe, saves us gas," my mom said, smiling out the window as I joined the others. At first, I thought so too. Mr. Daniels was friendly, joking around with us as he drove. He asked about tests, games, what music we liked. He always had gum or snacks in the glove compartment. "See," my dad said, "that's a good man. Salt of the earth." But after a while, I started noticing things. The first time was after practice. My friend Tyler usually rode home with Mr. Daniels. One night, he didn't show up to school the next morning. Everyone assumed he'd stayed home sick. But when I asked him about it the next day, he looked confused. "I didn't get home till late," he said softly, avoiding my eyes. It was a long night. I thought he meant homework, or maybe his parents kept him out somewhere. But then it happened again. Another kid, Jessie, rode with Mr. Daniels one Friday morning. I saw her get in. She didn't come to school that day. Monday, she was back, quieter than before, pale like she hadn't slept all weekend. "Everything okay?" I asked her in the hallway. She didn't answer. She just walked away, clutching her backpack like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I told myself I was imagining things, coincidences. Kids got sick. They skipped. They stayed over with relatives. But the pit in my stomach grew heavier each week. And then I saw the SUV up close. One afternoon, I stayed after school later than usual. When I walked through the parking lot, I passed Mr. Daniels' SUV. The doors were open, sunlight spilling inside. At first glance, it looked normal water bottles, fast food bags, a couple of baseball gloves tossed in the back. But then I caught sight of the straps, not seat belts, not the kind that came standard in the vehicle. These were black nylon straps, bolted to the floor beneath the seats, partially concealed by a blanket. The loops were large enough to slip a wrist through. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Before I could get a closer look, Mr. Daniels' voice boomed. "Hey, kiddo." I jumped, startled. He was standing behind me, keys jingling in his hand, flashing his usual wide smile. "Need a ride home?" I shook my head quickly. "My dad's picking me up." He chuckled. "Suit yourself. The doors are always open." He winked and hopped inside. I turned and walked away, my legs shaky. That night, I tried to talk to my parents about it. "I think there's something weird about Mr. Daniels." My dad's brow furrowed. "Weird how I saw straps in his car, like not normal ones." "Like what?" He interrupted. "Like bungee cords, everyone has stuff in their car. You're overreacting." My mom shot me the look. The one that clearly said, "Drop it, honey. He's doing the community a favor. Don't go stirring up trouble." I went to bed feeling sick to my stomach. The next morning, Mr. Daniels honked outside as usual. My mom practically pushed me out the door with my backpack. "Don't keep him waiting." Inside the SUV, the straps were gone. The blanket was folded neatly, and a couple of baseball gloves were stacked on top. Mr. Daniels grinned at me in the rearview mirror. "Sleep well." I nodded, avoiding eye contact by staring at my shoes. But I couldn't shake the images of Jessie's pale face, Tyler's strange silence, and those straps bolted to the floor. So, I started watching him more carefully. Every night, his SUV would pull back into the cul-de-sac around 9 p.m. Sometimes later. It was always clean, always empty. But a couple of times, I saw him unloading something from the trunk, something heavy. He seemed to struggle with it, dragging it across the driveway and into his garage. The first time, I thought it might be some kind of equipment. The second time, I glimpsed the corner of a backpack strap dangling loose as he hauled it inside. And it wasn't just any backpack. It was red, frayed around the edges, and covered in patches. It was Jesse's backpack. I froze at my bedroom window, my breath fogging up the glass. He glanced around, as if to make sure nobody was watching, then disappeared into the garage, closing the door behind him. When he came out again, the backpack was gone. I lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling, the sound of that garage door echoing in my head. The next morning, Jesse wasn't at school. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jesse's red backpack vanishing into Mr. Daniel's garage, the way his shoulders were hunched as he dragged it across the driveway. When I got to school the following morning, Hannah's desk was empty too. The teachers just shrugged. Maybe she's sick, they said, but I knew better. For the next few days, I became obsessed. I watched his house from my window, counting the times the SUV came and went. Sometimes he was gone for hours. Sometimes he came back late, his headlights sweeping across the cul-de-sac at midnight. I started writing everything down in my own notebook, the dates, the times, and who I saw getting into his car. My parents thought I was being ridiculous. "You're acting paranoid," my dad said when he caught me staring out the window. "Daniels is a good man. Don't go spreading rumors." But then it happened again. On Friday morning, another kid from down the block, Hannah, climbed into his SUV. She didn't come back to school after the weekend. When I asked her brother about it, he said their parents told him she was visiting relatives, but I could see it in his face when he said it. He didn't believe it either. That night, I made up my mind. If nobody else would look into it, I would. I waited until almost midnight. The cul-de-sac was silent. All the houses were dark. Mr. Daniel's SUV was parked in his driveway, a faint light coming from the garage windows. I slipped out the back door, my heart pounding, and crept across the lawn. The rain from earlier that day had left the grass slick, soaking my sneakers. As I got closer, I heard it, a low, steady hum like machinery. Then a scrape, as if something heavy was being dragged across concrete. I crouched under the garage window, stood on tiptoe, and peeked inside. Mr. Daniels was bent over in the center of the room, sweat glistening on his forehead. He was lifting something out of the trunk of his SUV, grunting with the effort. It wasn't equipment. It wasn't groceries. It was a large duffel bag, lumpy and misshapen. He dragged it across the floor and disappeared down a short flight of stairs into the basement. When he came back up, the bag was gone. I stumbled back from the window, bile rising in my throat, my vision blurred. I wanted to run home, call the police, scream until the whole neighborhood woke up. But then my foot bumped into something by the side of the garage. A backpack, not Jesse's, not Hannah's, mine. I staggered back, confusion and terror washing over me. My backpack was leaning against the siding, the one with the broken zipper pull and faded marker stains. But it was empty, lighter than it should have been. When I unzipped it with trembling fingers, I found a piece of paper inside with neat, blocky handwriting. "Tomorrow, it's your turn." The words swam before my eyes. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I stuffed the note back in and sprinted home. my lungs burning, my vision narrowing. I locked every door, shoved a chair under my doorknob, and sat awake until dawn with the backpack at my feet, as if proof would somehow make me feel less crazy. When I showed my parents the next morning, they just stared at the note as if it were nothing. My mom sighed. Probably a prank. Maybe some kids messing with you? A prank, I shouted. Jesse's gone. Hannah's gone. Tyler's gone, too, and he has my backpack. How do you explain that? My dad's jaw tightened. Enough. Daniels has done more for this neighborhood than anyone. Don't you dare accuse him of whatever this is. I won't hear it. I knew then that I was on my own. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my window, my eyes locked on his driveway. At 2:00 a.m., his garage light flicked on. The SUV door opened, and this time, he didn't drag out a duffel bag. He just stood there looking up at my window, smiling. I dropped to the floor, my heart thundering, sweat cold on my skin. When I dared to look again, the garage light was off. But in the darkness, I could have sworn I saw the faint red glow of taillights idling at the curb. By morning, my backpack was gone. I don't know how he got it. I had shoved it under my bed, zipped and hidden, but it was gone, replaced by another note. Tonight. I told myself to run, to go to the police station and never come back, to beg a friend to hide me, but fear pinned me down. Heavy and paralyzing. That evening, as the sun went down, the familiar sound of his SUV idling outside filled me with dread. My parents called up the stairs. "Carpool's here!" I froze. My hands gripped the bedsheets so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Carpool's here," my mom repeated, cheerfully, as if nothing was wrong. And that was the moment I understood. It wasn't that they didn't believe me. It was that they already knew. Our neighborhood had always been quiet, not boring, not unsafe, just quiet in the way that cul-de-sacs usually are. Kids rode bikes. Parents waved from their porches. Sprinklers ticked in the evenings. It was normal until Mr. Halpern took over the HOA. He was elected in some half-hearted vote that most people didn't even bother showing up for. Nobody cared much at the time. He seemed polite enough, a retiree with wire-rimmed glasses and neatly parted gray hair, the kind of man who pruned his hedges with scissors. At first, it seemed like he was just being thorough. He sent letters reminding people to mow their lawns, keep their trash cans out of sight, and repaint their fences if the paint was chipped. Annoying, sure, but nothing too out of the ordinary. My dad grumbled about it, but he paid the fines. But then the rules started piling up. By spring, there were curfews, a ban on outdoor lights after 10 p.m., no cars parked on the street overnight, and then noise restrictions. No music louder than a whisper after 8:30. By summer, people were being cited for things that weren't even in the HOA handbook. A wreath that was the wrong shade of red, curtains that clashed with the neighborhood's uniform aesthetic. The strangest part was that nobody fought him on it. People complained and muttered behind closed doors, but they always complied. Fines got paid, and violations got corrected. And if anyone resisted, their house would suddenly go dark. Curtains drawn, driveway empty, as if they'd moved away overnight. That was the first thing that really unsettled me. Nobody ever saw those families leave. No moving trucks, no garage sales, just gone. I asked my mom once if she'd noticed. She told me not to gossip. "People move all the time," she said. "It's not our business." But I started keeping a list. The Robinsons, the Velasquez family, the Millers, they all moved within 6 months. Way too many for one small street. and always after Halpern had targeted them for some infraction. The first time I saw him up close was when he came to our house. It was 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was up late doing homework when there was a knock at the door. My dad answered, looking confused and wearing his robe. There stood Mr. Halpern, clipboard in hand, smiling politely. "Your recycling bin is 3 inches too close to the sidewalk," he said softly. "That's a violation." My dad laughed, thinking it was a joke. 3 inches? Are you serious? Halpern's smile didn't waver. "All rules are serious, Mr. Jameson. The neighborhood only functions if every household is consistent." He made my dad sign a citation right there on the porch. Then he wished him a good night and walked away, his clipboard tucked under his arm. The next morning, the Robinsons' house, 2 doors down, was empty. That was the moment I knew something was seriously wrong. I started noticing how often he walked the neighborhood, morning, afternoon, and night, always with the clipboard, always smiling faintly. He never waved or acknowledged you. He just watched. Sometimes, when I looked out my bedroom window late at night, I'd see him standing in the cul-de-sac, motionless, staring at the houses. His head would tilt slightly, like he was cataloging us. One Saturday, I rode my bike past his house. His blinds were open. I slowed down, curious. Inside, I saw stacks of folders piled high on his dining room table. Each one was labeled with a family name in neat, block letters. Before I could get a better look, he appeared at the window, staring at me, smiling. I pedaled home so fast I almost crashed. That night, I told my parents again that something was wrong with him. My mom hushed me. My dad snapped, "You don't understand how communities work. He's keeping order. Without rules, neighborhoods fall apart." I wanted to scream. At what cost? 2 weeks later, the Hendersons vanished. That was when I decided to investigate on my own. I waited until after midnight, when the cul-de-sac was silent. Halpern's house sat at the end, his blinds drawn, and the porch light glowing. I crept across the lawn, my notebook of names clutched in my hand. The window I'd seen before was dark but unlocked. My heart pounded as I pushed it open and slipped inside. The smell hit me first: paper, dust, and something chemical, like disinfectant. The dining room table was just as I remembered it, covered in files. I opened the top one. Inside were photos of the Robinsons smiling in their front yard. Notes in tidy handwriting: violation, holiday lights after curfew, fine, unpaid, escalated. The next page was their schedule: work hours, grocery days, what time their kids got home from school, every detail of their lives. The last page was stamped in red, removed. I dropped it, shaking, and grabbed another folder. The Velasquez family. Same thing. Schedules, notes. A final red stamp removed. I flipped through file after file, my stomach churning. Every family that had moved away was here, cataloged, documented, and erased. Then I saw a file with my family's name, Jameson. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were photos of our house, my dad mowing the lawn, my mom unloading groceries, me walking home from school with my backpack slung over my shoulder, notes in the same neat handwriting: bin placement 3 inches too close, noise violation, television audible after 9:15 p.m., lawn inconsistent with guidelines. The last page wasn't stamped. Not yet. At the bottom, in black ink, was a single word: tomorrow. It burned in my head like it had been branded there. For a moment, I stood frozen in Mr. Halpern's dining room, surrounded by stacks of files on families who'd moved away. I wanted to grab the folder, run, shove it into my parents' hands, and make them see. But my hands were shaking so badly that I dropped it. The sound echoed too loudly in the quiet house. Footsteps creaked upstairs. I bolted for the window, my heart pounding, and scrambled back across the lawn. I didn't stop until I was back in my own room, the blinds drawn, and my chest heaving like I'd just run a marathon. The next morning, the world looked the same. Birds chirped, sprinklers hissed, and kids rode their bikes down the street. But every smile, every wave, felt wrong, staged. At breakfast, I tried to tell my parents. My voice shook as I told them about the files, the photos, and the word removed stamped across page after page. My dad's jaw tightened. My mom's hands trembled as she stirred her coffee. Finally, my dad said quietly, "We don't talk about Halpern. That's how you stay safe." Safe. The word clanged in my skull. Safe from what? Safe from him. That night, I couldn't sit still. I kept staring at the clock, counting the hours until midnight, until tomorrow, until whatever removed meant. At exactly 11:45, a knock rattled our front door 3 times, steady and deliberate. My parents didn't move. My dad sat rigid in his chair, staring at the wall. My mom's knuckles whitened around her coffee mug. The knock came again, louder. I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. Mr. Halpern stood on our porch, a clipboard in one hand and a flashlight in the other. His smile looked carved into his face. "Jameson's," he called softly. "It's time for inspection." My knees buckled. He knew. He always knew. The door clicked open before I could stop it. My dad had unlocked it. He didn't argue or resist. He just stepped aside as Mr. Halpern walked in. "Living room," Halpern said calmly, jotting notes on his clipboard. "Furniture placement inconsistent with community guidelines." He moved through the house like an appraiser, his eyes scanning every corner, his pen scratching steadily. In the kitchen, he noted the dishes in the sink. Non-compliant. In the hallway, he pointed at a crooked picture frame. Non-compliant. Every word was a death sentence. Finally, he stopped in front of me. His pale eyes locked on mine. His smile widened. "Noise disturbance," he said softly. "Unreported entry into restricted property." I couldn't breathe. My chest heaved, my lungs refusing to pull in air. Halpern snapped his clipboard shut. "Effective immediately removal." The lights in the house flickered and went out. Through the window, I saw silhouettes moving in the cul-de-sac. Neighbors, dozens of them, standing in the dark, shoulder to shoulder, all facing our house. Their porch lights blinked off, one by one, until the street was swallowed in black. "Dad," I whispered, my voice breaking. He didn't answer. He just lowered his head, his hands trembling at his sides. My mom finally looked at me, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The front door swung wide open. Figures stepped inside, silent and orderly, as if they'd practiced this 100 times. Their faces were blank and expressionless as they reached for us. I tried to run, but strong hands clamped around my arms, dragging me toward the door. I screamed, kicked, and clawed, but no one reacted. No one helped. The last thing I saw before they pulled me into the night was Mr. Halpern smiling at the top of the stairs, his clipboard in hand. "Neighborhood integrity must be maintained," he said calmly. The door slammed shut behind me, and the next morning, our house stood empty, the curtains drawn, and the driveway clear. By noon, a "for sale" sign was already in the yard.